Hello, Sean O'Neill here. I want to go over some of our LaFrance migration over time. Kind of where do we come from? How does our LaFrance line make it back to France, and then expand to other branches of the tree, showing our strong ties there. And I'll include a few pictures from our trip in 2022 to Canada. So we get back to Francois Dubois de LaFrance, came from Saint-Potin, Bretagne, France in 1651. And he came with the Carignan Salieres regiment, which was there to help protect Quebec City from the Iroquois attacks, 1665. Anne Guillaume, she landed in Quebec City in 1671 from France as part of the Filles du Roi program, and they met and they were married in Quebec City, October 19th, 1671. And then soon after that, they lived down in the other side of the river, Pointe de Boyer, or Cap Rouge, as it was called at the time. And back at that time, it would ice over, and you could actually use a cart and wagon to carry things across during the winter. This is a plaque in Montreal on the left of the Carignan Salieres Regiment. And then on the right, there's a lot of references to the Filles du Roi program, which I'll talk about more in a second. This is the church Notre Dame de Quebec in Quebec City, in the upper part of the city. It's not the exact same church that was there in 1671. It was actually burned down multiple times, including when the British attacked and took over in 1759. But it's been, replaced multiple times. After they lived there, then they stayed in the southern side, and all that was all called Lausanne. Their son Philippe, our seventh great grandpa, was born at Saint Joseph de la Pointe de Lévis, 1682. And then in 1688, they lived a little bit down in St. Nicholas after they actually requested a lease from Monsignor Laval, who was like the top Catholic figure in Canada. And they had a hard scrabble life there. And that's where sixth great grandpa Nicholas was born, 1724. Here's some pictures there. The church at St. Joseph de la Pointe de Lévis. And just for reference, right nearby is a statue to Guillaume Couture, who's a 10th great grandpa on the other side. There's actually a statue in a museum, depictions of him. Okay, further down, we see Jacques, 5th great grandpa, was born in 1755 near there. And then they migrated, would have been by boat, down to the Montreal region, which is where Jacques was married in Varennes in 1785. And then son Nicholas, our 4th great grandpa, was born in 1791. Then the next generations, they had moved down to Saint Jean Baptiste, where Regis was born in 1814, and then Alphonse in 1862. This is just a map, John Carver map, 1763, that the British did to try to capture what it looked like at that time. This is what Varennes looked like. The church, you can see the depiction on the left was in a museum we ended up going to later, is what it looked like at the time. Most of the things have been rebuilt since that time, but you can see strong family ties there. Then inland, this is what Jean Baptiste looked like. And you can see in the cemetery many references to family names, very close family names. Don't know how we're related to them, but I'm going to figure that out. And I reproduced the picture that Peter took there a couple years ago. Actually, Christine took there. And this really felt like home. Then we see the migration down to the US. Alphonse was actually married in Vermont in 1884, but Pete, Joseph Rosario, was born back in St. Hyacinthe in 1891, and daughter Dora was born in New Bedford in 1896. And so you can see that there's lots of migration back and forth, and that was all during the Industrial Revolution. So we don't have exact details of what they did during the times they were going back and forth, but there were definitely kids born in both places. This is what we saw of St. Hyacinth. Didn't see too much. didn't have a specific place to go. But this is the last place where our Canadian ties are on the LaFrance side. So then Edmund was actually born there in New Bedford in 1919 and then married in 1941. And then they moved down to Freehold in about 1957. Peter has stayed there, but Sue and Ed Jr. have moved on. A lot of the other family stayed in New Bedford. Tried to follow the LaFrance line and how it has shifted over time. It was Dubois de LaFrance, and D names are something that the French um, soldiers made to try to basically have unique nicknames or indicators, tracking names for each of the soldiers. Everyone was unique. So it was Dubois of or from, or his nickname was France. And then later on, it became Dubois LaFrance and then LaFrance. Some branches of the family went with Dubois, and we can find some of them living back up in the Quebec, Montreal area. And the spellings in the uppercase is not exactly clear of how and when it was written, right? Some were written by them, some were written by other people. Then I tried to study where did everybody go after 1957, and all over. So people lived all over. New Jersey, Virginia, Ohio, Michigan, Arkansas, a lot in Dallas, a lot in San Diego, and then Oregon. Some numbers. Everyone has two great parents, four great grandparents, eight great grandparents. Um, Not everyone knows who they all are or captured as many, and we were able to do that because of the strong um, tracking of births and marriages and probate, everything that they did in Canada. And so we can really find a lot. And so most of them came over between around 1620 and 1700, most between 1665 and 1700, a pretty tight window. And we have ties to most everybody who founded Quebec. When you walk down the street and you find a plaque, it'll be some ancestor that you could look up and find that they're eighth or ninth great grandma. And then you can see like eighth great grandparents just on my mother's side, Sue's side. I can say there's 512, and I've identified 393 of them. That's just pretty rare in most family trees, and that's due to the record keeping. So it really helps. Where did they all come from? You can see I did a pretend driving map around France to go find them all, and it's really everywhere. But most came from Rouen in the north or La Rochelle in the west. A few came from Switzerland, England, Scotland, Germany. A couple were First Nations, were already there. So now just talk about some things we found around in Quebec and Montreal in the area. There's a plaque called the First Colonist plaque in Montmorency Park in Quebec City, and there's 47 couples listed, and out of those, 28 couples are our ancestors, including some of the most famous of Canada: Louis Hébert, Marie Rolette, uh, Abraham Martin of Plains of Abraham, Zachary Cloutier and Saint Dupont, and then Olivier Lectardif and Louise Quillard. I'll talk about them a little bit later. Um, Talk about our links. It's pretty crazy. So Zachary Cloutier and Saint Dupont, we are related to five of their children. And you can see their first, the third, the sixth, the eighth, and the ninth of their kids all go down to the right. Every generation is down to the right, all the way down to both Lillian Pauline Bourbeau and Edmund LaFrance. And so we're actually both grandma and grandpa are related to those same kids. And you can see some are one generation off, and that's because everyone had 10 to 20 kids. So an older child in one generation might marry the youngest child of the next generation, and to them, they're about the same age. So when you think of 8 generations, 9 generations, that's not shocking. Uh, there are Filles à Marier, which is a program that was not official. It was just what they called the girls, women who went over to Canada or were daughters and went over. They did not get paid. They were not recruited. They did not receive any dowry, but they went there trying to seek a better life. And they would get married and help to populate. There weren't too many, 262, but at least 55 are our ancestors. So there's some interesting stories there. Then the Grande Recrue of 1653 is an effort to protect Montreal from Iroquois attacks. And so they recruited about 118 men as soldiers to defend them, and at least 22 are our ancestors. There's a plaque talking about them in Montreal. There was the Feed a Raw program that a lot of people have heard about. So it's about 10 years where Louis XIV actually made a very concerted effort to have young women that were ready to be married or marriageable to go to Canada to help grow the population and make it last, make it stay. And so they were actually given a dowry and passage and some training, and and put up in housing when they got to Canada to help them. And of the 768 women listed that made it to Canada, at least 85 are our ancestors. And everyone, I think, in the family knows Anne Guillaume. She was the most known of our filles de rats, but there are many. And there's lots of references to them around Montreal and Quebec. Then there's many others who aren't as in those famous programs. There's Marie Olivier Sylvestre Manitobich. I don't know how to say it, but she's our ninth great grandma. She was the daughter of a native who was either Algonquin or Wyandot or Huron, but he was a good friend of ninth great grandpa Olivier Latardif that I mentioned a minute ago. And when she was born, Olivier adopted her and brought her to Ursuline school and made sure she learned how to read and write. And then she was actually married to Martin Prevost. That was the first marriage of a native woman and a Frenchman, and officially. Another case is Daniel Zellman, who's a fifth grade grandpa, pretty recent arrival. Uh, he was actually fighting for the British in the Revolutionary War, and then he stayed and married a French Canadian woman. So that is one little French tie we have. And actually, he's from about 120 kilometers from where both Jennifer's and my German families are from in central Germany. Another sad case is Thankful Stebbins. She is from a family who had lived in Massachusetts for a while, from England. And in 1704, there was this um, raid massacre in Deerfield, Massachusetts by French Canadians and Native Americans, part of Queen Anne's War. And many people were killed, and the village was burned, and many people were brought away as captives. And some returned, but some stayed. And Thankful stayed and actually became Teresa Louise Legrain when she married and became our eighth great grandma. So she became part of our French Canadian family. So then I have a few more pictures that are just about our trip, some more interesting things from this last year. And a lot of the tree research came from Peter LaFrance and me, but a lot of others have helped a lot. Lauren and Christine and Paula, a lot of people have helped. And I can't wait to keep learning more. So Montreal, just to show a depiction, we don't think of Montreal as our family home, but many of the family did live in Montreal or in the nearby outskirts. In Montreal, there's the Chateau Ramsay, which is a 1705 manor house that is now a museum, and it's a very interesting museum. Outside on the walls of the garden are the plaques of the Carignan Salieres regiment and the Grande Recrue of 1653. The Down the street in the Place de Youville is the Founders and First Colonists Monument, and on there are a couple more family members, and this is like really early on, like 1630s, 1620s. Outside of town a little bit is the Maison Saint Gabriel, and this is one of the places where about 175 of the filles de rats lived and trained under Marguerite Bourgeois for about 5 years, and 9 of our ancestors, filles de rats, lived there and worked there and studied there. Very interesting museum now too. And then a little further out of town is Lebert Lemoyne House, which is one of the oldest houses still there. And now it's a museum, which is also interesting. Then you go to find out that it was built by Charles Lemoyne and Jacques Lebert. Charles is actually an eighth great granduncle, and he's the father of Pierre d'Iberville, who's a famous explorer and soldier. Then away from Montreal a little bit, Fort Chambly on the Richelieu River was built a couple years later, and a lot of our family lived there in that town. And Sir Marc Sir Richelieu didn't really know about it, but I found that many of our family lived there, and including this is the only gravestone I found of a family member on the tree that I knew, not a ceremonial one from the 1600s. So Jean-Baptiste Baudry was buried there. Berkshire is back along the St. Lawrence River, and this town is where fifth great grandpa was married, and you can see a lot of tributes to the anniversary, the 300, 350th, a lot of tributes to the history of French Canada are all around there. Boucherville is a little bit down the river, and it's a beautiful town. And this is where fifth great grandpa died in 1838. But also in looking at the fancy monuments of the founders, Pierre Boucher and Jean Crevier, they are family. She is a first cousin, 10 times removed. We share a 10th great grandpa. Go further up the river on the way to Montreal, on the way from Montreal to Quebec is Trois Rivières. And so this is a town that a lot of the family lived in, just none of the LaFrance line. And then outside of Quebec City is Ile d'Orléans, and the little town, one specific little town is Sainte-Famille. Many of our family lived there, and you can see all those blue lines are places where our family was known to have lived, either owned it or lived it, according to notarial records in the 1600s and 1700s, let alone continued to live there. So probably there's more, but this is just a snapshot I found. And that statue is a tribute to all the people who lived in Sainte-Famille, and of which, of course, many of them are our family. Up the other side of the river is L'Ange Gardien and the Maison Leberge, house originally built by 10th great grandpa, one of the oldest houses in the Quebec area, and and that owner there actually lives nearby us in Austin, Texas. We looked for where Francois and Anne lived in 1672 on that lease, and it's now a modern housing development. So it's kind of interesting how it's progressed. We went down the river to St. Nicholas, and lots of family lived there for nearly 100 years. Church has changed a little bit, but there's good remembrances of it. Further south is Saint Antoine de Tilly. One of the founders of the town was actually Francois and Anne's son, Jean Baptiste Dubois de LaFrance, and also some other family lived there. So most of these towns, almost every town we come across, there's family who live there. So summary, just our trip, end of July into August, and Natalie and Spencer were able to go with us, which worked out great. We missed Caroline. We flew in and out of Toronto, which let us go to CN Tower and check out things, and we drove up through Ottawa. So we saw Justin Trudeau's place of business, and he is, of course, ninth cousin, one time removed. We were in a rental, so we were able to really check out all the small towns. Did some bike rides, saw an infinite number of family sites. We went to the living wake of Bob Odenkirk, Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, and we got a guided tour of Quebec City from Xavier up there on the right. So he spent 4 hours after studying for 2 months, um, and he gave us a very detailed family-specific tour where he knew who our family was and what we needed to see. So it was really interesting. So we're really looking forward to going back, and we really liked our time. So if you hope you appreciated this, and let me know if you have any questions.